It's How to Be Amazing. I'm Michael Ian Black, coming to you today with a special episode of How to Be Amazing from the Mark Twain Library in Reading, Connecticut. The Mark Twain Library was founded in 1908 by Reading resident Mark Twain and relies on public support to continue its mission. These special episodes of How to Be Amazing are produced in conjunction with the Mark Twain Library. If you enjoy this program, please consider making a donation to the Mark Twain Library at marktwainlibrary.org. So as we start today, I want you to consider something kind of startling for a moment. I'll begin with something obvious. You are a conscious being. You know yourself to be yourself. Everything in the world that you have ever perceived has been as a result of your consciousness. It is our most fundamental trait as humans, and yet we have no idea what consciousness is. We don't know where it comes from or how it works or where to locate it in the body. The single most important thing about us is a total and complete mystery. My guest today, Dr. Deepak Chopra, has devoted his life and career to exploring consciousness, first as a neuroendocrinologist when he became interested in the connection between mind and body, then as an author and as one of the global leaders in an endeavor that seeks to bridge the gap between the mystical and the scientific to understand consciousness and what he calls ultimate reality. Deepak Chopra is the author of 90 books, including his latest, Metahuman, Unleashing Your Ultimate Potential. And it is my pleasure to welcome Deepak Chopra to How to Be Amazing. Hello.
Hi, it's great to be with you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I want to start today with an anecdote. We just recorded another episode with the actress Jane Lynch, who told me about an experience she sometimes has had periodically throughout her life, in which she believes herself to be leaving her body and is able to observe herself. The first chapter of your new book, Metahuman, describes research into these out-of-body experiences. What is happening to Jane when she experiences this and people like her?
What's happening to Jane is she's having an experience of fundamental reality, and that is very exciting. The big mystery of our existence is not the out-of-body experience, it's the in-body experience. Right now, you think you are in your body, as does everybody else. Okay, so that is actually a misconception, because consciousness is invisible. It doesn't have a color or a texture or a shape or a form or a sound. It's formless, and being formless, it's infinite and cannot have a container. Container means the body or the mind or the brain. It cannot, theoretically. Anything that has no form, theoretically, can't have a container. Your body is an experience in consciousness. So once you understand that, then the out-of-body experience is the only legitimate experience. The world is in consciousness, your body is in consciousness, thoughts are in consciousness, images are in consciousness, sensations are in consciousness, perceptions are in consciousness. Consciousness experience is itself as experience, and thus localizes as a body-mind, but it's not in the body-mind. It's like, is electricity in the bulb, or is it coming from somewhere else?
Right. Well, in the case of electricity, we know where it's coming from. We know how it's generated. We know the transmission system for it, and we know how it ultimately emerges. Do we know the same thing about consciousness?
Anything you know about consciousness scientifically, say through neuroscience or through genetics or through epigenetics or through measuring biological markers or correlates of consciousness, anything you know that way scientifically is inferential. You're not looking at consciousness, you're looking at the byproducts of consciousness. So there is no scientific, and theoretically, there's no scientific understanding of consciousness other than inferential. This is a great contribution already of science, that we can infer that consciousness is fundamental by looking at its biological correlates. The only direct experience of consciousness is going back to your own awareness as being fundamental. Ask yourself simple question, is the experience of my body in consciousness? The answer is obvious. What is the experience of your body? It's sensations and perceptions. Where do they come from? Consciousness. Okay. Where is a thought coming from? Consciousness. Can you have a thought without consciousness? Can you have a perception? Can you experience a body? Can you experience the Milky Way galaxy? They're all being experienced in consciousness. So consciousness by itself is irreducible, has no cause, has no origin, is not in space or time, is irreducible, and expresses itself as experience. That's all we need to know. Replace the word object or the Milky Way galaxy or the physical body or a tree with one word, experience. Before you call that a tree, that a Milky Way galaxy, replace that with one word, experience. Then ask yourself, what is the experience? And if you really seriously ask yourself that question, what is the experience? It's sensations and perceptions and feelings and thoughts. That's it. If there's an experience outside that, let me know. Is there an experience that is not a sensation, a perception, an image, a feeling, or a thought? That's the first thing. Then second thing is, where is this experience happening? Is the experience of sensation happening in my brain? Well, you can put a knife through the brain, doesn't feel a thing. Okay? So it's not happening in my brain. Where is it happening? Consciousness. Where is it? Has no location. The whole problem with the scientific pursuit of understanding consciousness is they're looking out there without asking the question, who or what is looking?
And so what is the answer to that question? Who or what is looking?
Consciousness is looking. It's knowing itself as experience, and as it looks, it divides itself into the subject and the object of experience. So right now, in consciousness is the experience of you and me and everyone who's listening or watching us. So it's not happening in your brain. It's happening in this, what scientists today would call cyberspace. Mm-hmm. Cyberspace is a restricted cognitive space, a restricted perceptual space for only those who have signed on to this URL. Okay, and this URL is a construct. We made it up. Just like New York City is a construct. We made it up. Latitude and longitude is a construct. We made it up. Greenwich Mean Time is a construct. We made it up. Nation states are construct. Money is construct. Wall Street is construct. But what we don't realize is even the brain is a construct. Brain is a construct for a perceptual activity in consciousness. And science particularly, is conceived in consciousness. Where do we do science? Science is a methodology of consciousness. So there's no scientific explanation of consciousness. There's only consciousness explaining itself through science.
So if I understand you correctly, we infer consciousness through our own experiences. Okay. That consciousness itself exists infinitely and without form throughout everything that is.
And it's timeless. It's not even eternal. Eternal implies forever in space and time.
A beginning and end.
We're talking of something that's not in space and time. And if you listen to the good cognitive scientists today, like Don Hoffman, brilliant scientists who trained with Watson and with Crick, the person.
The DNA guys.
Yeah, and he clearly says that the whole notion of space-time is doomed. So that it's a construct, the same way as latitude is a construct. Space-time is the interface through which we experience each other, and consciousness actually is not in space-time. Even space-time is an experience in consciousness.
And what does he believe will replace the concept of space-time?
That which is totally inconceivable now, because something that's formless can't be conceived, right? Mm-hmm. By definition. As soon as you conceive it, you're basically out of it, right? So he believes that whatever outside space-time is consciousness, and it's fundamental. I'm happy to send you a link to his talk, University of California, Irvine. He's a cognitive professor, and basically he says that space-time is doomed. Consciousness is the background of space-time.
Please do. We will post it on our website. So the next part of my question is, if we understand consciousness to be everywhere and timeless, and that our perceptions of consciousness are filtered through our experiences, are you saying that consciousness itself is a single entity, and therefore are all of our consciousnesses interrelated and interdependent?
Yes, 100%. And by the way, even the great, what's his name? Schrodinger said, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics, he says consciousness cannot be divided or multiplied, implying that it's a singularity. And so it is the ultimate singularity, not the unified field, which people are struggling with, space-time, gravity, how does it connect with the entanglement of quantum events, and you know that,
Mm-hmm.
Strong interactions, weak interactions, electromagnetism are one single activity, but it doesn't correlate with gravity. And so if they did, you'd have a unified theory of everything. But it wouldn't be a unified theory of everything. It wouldn't explain consciousness, even if you had the equations. The reason you can't find the unified field theory is you're using two methodologies which are different to explore reality. One is the macroscopic space-time Einstein grand theory of unification, and the other is quantum mechanics, which is very microscopic. So it's not that the theories don't align, the modes of observation in consciousness don't align. And if you understood consciousness as the singularity, then you would say space-time and the universe is one mode of knowing, and quantum mechanics is another mode of knowing. But consciousness is a singularity, and your individual consciousness is part of the matrix of entangled consciousness, which is not just human. This is another mistake. When you experience the world, you experience it through human perceptual activity in human consciousness. What does the world look like to an insect with 100 eyes?
Very different.
You don't know, right? In Metahuman, I have the example of a common butterfly called the painted lady. She smells the world through her antenna. She tastes the world through her feet. She hears the world through her wings. She has 30,000 lenses in her eyes that move like a kaleidoscope. I can't even remotely imagine what the world looks like to a butterfly. Now I can remotely imagine what it looks like to a dog because I have a relationship with the dog. So we have common perceptual activities. But even there, I don't know if the bark of a dog sounds the same to a dog as it sounds to me, because I don't have that perceptual apparatus. What does the world look like to a bat that moves through the echo of ultrasound, or a chameleons whose eyeballs swirl on two different axes? What's the world really like? And the answer is, there's no answer to that. There's no such thing. It depends on who's looking, what the consciousness is. Is it species specific? Because what you experience as the Milky Way galaxy and the Empire State Building is a species-specific perceptual experience that would totally mean nothing to a caterpillar. Mm-hmm. But the caterpillar also has consciousness, right? So what is that experience? Consciousness is species-specific, culture-specific, and subject to many interpretations: mythical, religious, philosophical, theological, scientific. They're all inferential.
So because we are all perceiving consciousness separately through our own biases and species biases or what have you, is it ever possible to experience another's consciousness, to tap into that greater consciousness and experience a larger consciousness?
You find that in all shamanic traditions, you find that in all indigenous tribes, you find that in any culture that is directly connected to nature and sees themselves as an expression of nature and not as me and nature as two different things. So with that caveat, the answer is yes. I know people who can communicate with birds. You communicate with your dog. You communicate with your cat. Why can't you communicate with a bird? The reason is you're not going to the reservoir of all these, the matrix, and beyond the matrix, not even the matrix. The matrix is entangled consciousness. Beyond the matrix is one consciousness. Once you go there, you can tap into other modes of knowing. That's what they are. Your body and mind is not consciousness. It's a mode of knowing in consciousness. So in the book, I have an example of a woman who could communicate with birds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that, and it's an amazing anecdote. Why don't you quickly relate it?
Well, I was at this conference in Arizona on the science of consciousness, and this woman came up to me in the garden, and she said, I can communicate with birds.
Which is an odd thing to say to a stranger in general, but great. It's an odd thing to say to a stranger. I can communicate with birds.
She's at a conference on consciousness, where that's all people are talking about.
Right.
And the conference has professionals, they have scientists, they have everybody, philosophers, but they also have a lot of new age people, a lot of indigenous representations. So she said, I can communicate with birds. And I said, oh yeah, she's one of those new age freaky people, my bias, right? And as I was walking away, I said, rushing, she said, by the way, I'm a PhD student in cognitive science at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, where they give out the Nobel Prizes.
Wow.
So that made me pause, telling you my bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, sit down next to me. And we sat on a bench in the garden. And she said, look at that bird. It's going to land on my lap in a few minutes. And it did. And then she actually lightly, gently made the motion of stroking it, and then the motion of letting it go, and it flew away. So I was intrigued. I said, did you speak to the bird in bird language? No. She said, I went to that place in my awareness where there's no language. And that's pure consciousness, where prior to experience. And then I just had the intention that it come to be. That's it.
The book Metahuman is about a kind of pathway that people can take to enhance their consciousness and get into an awake state, which I think is what you call it. How would you what is that awake state, and how, I'm assuming you feel like you have entered it, and if so, how did that happen? And did you understand for yourself when that was happening?
So all my life, I've been interested in what are called peak experiences. And of course, they're universal. You talk to athletes, there are moments of peak experiences. You talk to musicians, performers, acrobatics, and but also people who read poetry, or people who are in nature looking across the Grand Canyon. Suddenly you have a peak experience. And the commonalities of that peak experience is there's a loss of sense of personal self, number one, loss of ego identity. And there's a mechanism to that. There's a place in the brain called the default mode network, which is the network in the brain that houses, in a way, the biological correlates of the separate ego self. So that default mode network is not active in a peak.
Can we see that in MRIs?
Yes, yes. So there's no sense of personal self. Second, there's a sense of flow. Third, there's silence in the mind. Athletes, Joe Namath, long time ago told me that when he was playing, everything became silent. He went to his position before the ball arrived without thinking. People were clapping, he couldn't hear the noise. Everything was in slow motion. And it was a moment of glory and joy and being connected with all that is. That is a peak moment of awakening, which everybody has had. Children, when they play, they have those moments. Okay, all children have those moments when they play. Athletes have those moments in peak moments. Musicians have those moments in the, the crescendo of Beethoven Fifth Symphony, whatever. Poets have that. Hip hop artists have that. So it's a common experience. Waking up means that you're in flow all the time. Okay, that you experience a joyful, energetic body all the time, because in a peak moment, there's not even the awareness of a body, number one. So joyful, energetic body, a quiet mind, it goes into stillness. You feel emotions like love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And this is the real winner, you lose the fear of death. Why? Because what you've touched or glimpsed is not in time. This is the original religious experience, whether it's Jesus Christ or whether it's the Buddha, it doesn't matter. This is the original, or Muhammad, it doesn't matter. It's the original religious experience that got codified into what we call religious doctrine. But you can't get this experience by reading a book of religion. You can't, they cannot. It's an experience. It's not something that can be codified, but it's the basis of everything that humans have aspired to.
So it sounds like what you're describing is a personal experience. Can you describe that moment for you when it arrived, if it arrived, and maybe it hasn't?
I feel a joyful, energetic body all the time. I feel love and compassion in my heart all the time. My mind is quiet. I don't summon it reactively, no matter what the news is. I observe my reaction to react before I react. And so my responses are metabolized in consciousness before they become a bundle of conditioned reflexes and nerves triggered by people and circumstance. Not having that reactivity of access to creativity, which I can talk about if you want.
Please.
And then the last thing is, there is no fear. There is no fear of death whatsoever, because the unknown is known to me. What do you mean?
What do you mean when you say the unknown is known to me? What do you mean?
Consciousness is known to me directly, not through inferential scientific observations.
So
fundamental reality is intimate to me.
In the book, I just want to get the chapter right, you talk about the research of, let me just find it, Dr. Jeffrey Martin, who studies higher consciousness. And what was so interesting to me, I just dropped my microphone. And what was so interesting to me about it was his discovery that there are different levels of being awake. Can you describe what those levels are?
Yeah, although, even since I wrote the book, I have some qualms about being too dogmatic about the levels, because life is not like that, right? Life is kind of all mixed up. But
right, I understand. It's not like a karate class where you graduate and you get another belt.
That's right.
It's a spectrum of awakeness.
So, the signs of waking up is, one is that you use memories, but you do not allow memories to use you. So you're selective in what you identify with as a memory. You're not victimized by memory. You're a creator. If you allow memories to use you, you're a victim. If you allow memories to use you, you're a victim. But if you
Can I stay on that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think I understand what you're saying, because in the book you talk about how we are all married to story, we are all married to identity, and those memories are the stories that we tell ourselves, the identity that we have. So if you are able to kind of let those go and exist separate and apart from them, then you no longer are victimized by them. You can let go of these biases and this narrative.
Correct. And that solution is very simple. When you're having a memory, whatever that memory is, as the observer of the memory, you're intrinsically free of it.
I can imagine some people hearing this or watching this and thinking to themselves that that in a way might tarnish or cheapen the human experience. Can you explain why that wouldn't? That the narratives that we have, the identity that we have for so many people, myself included, I'm sure, is how we define ourselves, and to let that go would be to let ourselves go. How do we hold on to ourselves while letting ourselves be released?
I've struggled with that in my life. So, for me, the experience has been that kind of struggle, like a fruit that's ripening. And then one day, you don't know what happens. It falls and you're liberated. Now, to answer your question, intellectually, there's a practice that says, who am I? Okay, where you start with the body, then you watch with the mind, watch with the emotions, watch with memories. And if you do that exercise, who am I, as a meditation practice, you'll find you can't find an identity, that every identity was provisional. You don't have the same identity when you were an infant, or you don't have the same identity that you had as a teenager, or that what you have now will not be the identity. God willing, you live to 85, it'll be a different identity. So what is identity? And you realize that every identity that you've ever had is provisional and you're not even attached to it. I'm not, frankly speaking, I would rather get rid of the identity I had as a teenager. It was totally ridiculous. I would get rid of the identity I had as a resident, smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol and getting drunk on Fridays. Who needs that identity? So when you examine your identities, you'll realize all provisional. Why not choose the big identity where you can now have, by the choice of your memories, you can, and selecting your experiences, you can have any identity you want.
But
shamanic traditions, by the way, used to do these morphing of identities, be like a leopard, like a tiger, like a storm, like a thunder, like lightning. All this is possible as an experience.
So if I'm letting myself go, I'm letting all of that go, and I'm releasing these identities, and I can then sort of inhabit whatever identity I want. Where is that me who is wanting to inhabit these other identities? Like, where is that sense of personal self?
So because your me, your consciousness is also consciousness and invisible and formless, it has no location in space-time. Just like the original, what we might call pure consciousness, and your consciousness is conditioned consciousness, but it is consciousness nevertheless. So it has no location, no form, it's infinite, timeless, not subject to birth or death.
But it can have desire. Consciousness can have desire, I guess is what I'm asking.
It's the only way it begins to know itself. It starts with desire, then intention, then will, then speech, then choice. So it always starts with desire. In the Upanishads say, you are what your deepest desire is. As is your desire, so is your intention. As is your intention, so is your will. As is your will, so is your deed. As is your deed, so is your destiny.
You talked about starting your practice, your medical practice, when you were younger and you were that resident drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes. Was it hard for you to transition into this new work? Did you have to kind of release an identity in order to embrace what I'm sure was a kind of risky career path?
Yes and no. My training was in internal medicine. And then I went on to do endocrinology and neuroendocrinology. At the time I was training, and by the way, I'm 73 years old, so this is a long time ago, in the early 70s and mid 70s. And my training was with a very well-known endocrinologist who was the president of the Endocrine Society, Seymour Reichland, who's now 95, by the way. And if he catches a snake in his garden, he'll dissect the brain looking for neuropeptides. He's a real scientist, as they say. So we were looking at neuropeptides, like before people knew what they were. Serotonin.
I don't know what they are. What are they?
They're the molecules in your brain that transmit emotions.
Got it.
Serotonin, opiates, oxytocin, dopamine. They're molecules of emotion, but now it turns out they're also immunomodulators, not just present in the brain. They're everywhere in your body, which also tells you that consciousness pervades everything, not just the brain. Every single cell in your body, down to the last molecule. Okay, so we were looking at these molecules of emotion at that time. People didn't know much about them. Okay. Secondly, there was a way to measure them. You know, a person called Rosalind Yallo had won from the VA. She had won the Nobel Prize for actually discovering a technique called radioimmunoassay, where you can measure these molecules. So we could see them. Okay. And one of my colleagues, Candice Pert, used that expression, molecules of emotion. So that was a trigger in my head. And then as a physician, I was seeing patients, and I realized you could have two patients, same disease, same diagnosis, same doctor, same treatment, different outcomes. This person recovers, this person dies. In between, it's a bell-shaped curve. Everything is happening. So I knew that mechanistic medicine was not the solution, even though I would take antibiotics if I had pneumonia, even though I would get to a surgeon if I had appendicitis, even though if I broke a leg, I'd see an orthopod. But it wasn't the solution. It was looking at a very simple, simplistic, mechanistic explanation for human biology, which is influenced by every experience: thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, desires, relationship, nutrition, everything, eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism. It's complex. It's not just mechanistic. So that was my first insight. I tried to publish it. Nobody would accept the publication. I wrote the examples of my patients for peer-reviewed journals. Nobody would accept it. Finally, saw an ad in the New York Times, some vanity press. You can get your book published for $5,000. So I got 100 copies published for $5,000. A friend of mine placed it in the Harvard Coop in the window because she knew the manager. The book was picked up by a student who gave it to his mother, who was a literary agent, who called me and said, why don't you have a regular publisher? I said, nobody wanted it. She said, how much did you pay for it? I said, $5,000. She said, I'll get you $5,000. So it covers, and I get you a regular publisher. The rest was history. I didn't have to do anything. The book became a national bestseller. I was getting calls from Jackie Onassis to come to the other competitive publishing company. Stephen Hawking's editor called me and said, can I be your editor? And it just took over. It was outside my hands. Now, 45 years later, it's achieved full circle because I'm now back speaking at Harvard, co-writing books with Rudy Tanzi on genetics and epigenetics. So actually it was a struggle, but it was what I needed.
I'm not sure where you fall in your belief system on this, but is there part of you that believes that all of that was a series of happy accidents, or was there something kind of ordained about that sequence of events in your personal life?
I didn't look at it mystically. I just looked at it as me questioning my habitual certainties because of authority. Okay, so people are indoctrinated into habitual certainty because of authority figures, whether it's a priest or God in their imagination, or science, or a professor, or a Nobel laureate. Okay, we were automatically indoctrinated into their way of thinking, which means there's no creativity. We should talk about that. Creativity is the ultimate expression of consciousness. Ultimate expression is infinite creativity. So as soon as I started to question my habitual certainties, I said, why is that true? Well, the answer was, Professor so-and-so says it. DNA, it's fixed. Why? Watson and Crick said it. Okay, they got the Nobel Prize. Once you start questioning your habitual certainties, you break the mold of human in the direction of metahuman, which is creativity.
Is that creativity, that it's the ultimate expression of consciousness, creativity? Is it yours? Is it your creativity? Can you take ownership of the things that you write, for example? Do you feel that ownership, or do you feel like you're tapping into something that extends beyond you?
It's both. It's both. You stand on the shoulders of giants, you learn from them, you also discard a lot of them, and then you enhance your own creativity. I have a process. I'll tell you what the process is, okay? One's a very kind of linear process, which appeals to the Western mind, and the other is a process that is totally Indian and holistic and takes consciousness as fundamental. So here's the linear process. I have 9 steps to it. The first step is intended outcome. I have to know what I'm creating. Is it a poem? Is it a play? Is it a new scientific discovery? What's the intended outcome would be, I want to create, and I'm giving ideas now to your library. Somebody might pick up this idea. So the idea would be, I want to create a jet plane without fossil fuels. That's intended outcome. Okay. Right now, there's no such thing. Okay. Step 1. Then I visualize that. A jet plane that doesn't need fuel. Okay. Flying through solar energy or whatever, wind, gravity, dark energy. I don't know, but I visualize that. I have an intended outcome. Second is step 2, information gathering. I gather all the information about aviation and jet planes, etc., etc., as much. And today it's very easy. Google it. Okay. Third is information analysis. You analyze. It's the struggle part of the creativity. You analyze that information till you're exhausted. Okay. And there's an advantage to that. When you're exhausted, you give up. Okay, so that's the third step, is information. First is information, intended outcome, information gathering, information analysis to the point of exhaustion. That leads to what is called incubation. Some people listen to music, some people go to a symphony, some people play golf, some people just stand and watch a starlit sky. Some people meditate, it doesn't matter, okay? That's incubation. And incubation is the proliferation of uncertainty. Because if there is the proliferation of the certainty, you're going to repeat previous patterns, habitual certainties. So incubation is a letting go of every habitual certainty and allowing the proliferation of uncertainty. Then the 5th step, which happens all the time if you try it. Incubation, by the way, could also be sleep. Before you go to sleep, let go. The next step, which always happens if you follow the first few steps, is insight. Suddenly, you have an aha moment. You say, wow, that's the solution. If the insight is legitimate, it leads to inspiration. So that's the next step. Insight, inspiration. It's not motivation. Motivation is mental. People have to work very hard to motivate, to lose weight, go to the gym, this, that. Inspiration means you're in spirit. There's no going back. You say inspire. The word itself says you're inspired. So inspiration is the next step. And then the next step is implementation. You try it out. My idea, did it work? Implementation. Then the next step is integration. You integrate with what you know and you discard with the certainties that you thought were true. Okay, that's implementation. And the final step is incarnation. There's death and resurrection. The old way of thinking, context, meaning, relationship, story, dies. A new context, meaning, relationship, and story is born. It's not just new wine and an old bottle. It's a new wine and a new bottle. Nothing to do with the old bottle. It's a disruption. So true creativity is a disruption. It's not an algorithm. So it can never be created through artificial intelligence. Although artificial intelligence can give you a pretty good simulation of creativity because it's matching the creativity of the guy who programmed the thing. So true creativity involves those 9 steps, and I use them, whether I'm writing a book or having an idea about a patient, what's the best treatment for this patient, because it's unique to that patient, okay? So that's a creative process. Now, in the Eastern wisdom traditions, there's a whole other process which starts with that principle which we said, use memories, don't allow memories to use you. But the second thing is, look for the particular in the whole and the whole in the particular. So I could take any particular. What is this? It's a book.
And if you're listening, Deepak is holding up a red lined notebook.
Yeah, and so then what's inside? Paper and squiggles. Now, where's the meaning in this experience, which is just a qualia experience? It's a sensation, it's a perception. And these are squiggles, other perceptions. What's the meaning? When I start with that, I end up with the whole universe. So it's paper, it's a tree, it's an ecosystem, it's bugs and bees and butterflies, it's the weather patterns, it's the migration of animals, it's the stars, the galaxies, the sun, the moon, the sunshine, the air, the biosphere. It's atoms that were forged in the crucible of burning stars, 50% of them not even from the Milky Way galaxy. The whole universe is here. Okay, now, so that's the first step. So see the particular in the whole and the whole in the particular. Second step. First was, I use memories, but I don't allow memories to use me. Then third step, I think with the 5 senses, not just visually, I think auditorily. I think with sensation. I think with imagination. I think with the connection between what I think are unlikely space-time events in experience. So the next step then is think holistically, not through one mode of knowing. Seeing is only one mode of knowing. Imagining is only one mode of knowing. Hearing is another mode of knowing. There's so many modes of knowing. So in the Eastern wisdom traditions, these are called tanmatras, the subtle modes of knowing. Third. Fourth is understand relationship. Because relationship, who you relate with, even as a human experience, is actually taking on their story and sharing your story with them. So understand that every relationship is the sharing of a story. When you have shared vision, complementing strengths, emotional and spiritual bonding, total transparency, open feedback, allowing maximum diversity, artists, humanitarians, scientists, technologists, storytellers, all coming together with that shared vision, you harness not only your own creativity, you harness collective creativity. That leads to emergence. So there's individual creativity, there's universal creativity, and there is collective creativity, and we can tap into it all. Transcendence is the way to tap into universal creativity. Transcendence means beyond thought, the experience of stillness. Collective creativity through emergence, and individual creativity through the 9 steps.
How closely does this pathway to creativity mirror the pathway to being awake, as you describe, and as the direct path in Metahuman?
It's direct. Creativity and awakening is metahuman. That's all it is. Meta means beyond, and human means beyond the conditioned mind.
I was watching a debate that you were having with Richard Dawkins. I've watched a few of these, and it seemed to me watching that both of you were kind of well-intentioned. I mean, you know, it was prickly, but that it seemed like the conversation broke down when it came to language, that he couldn't hear what you were saying, because the framework for science as he understands it does not allow ideas that exist outside of science in. For people who are skeptical, and I'll count myself among them, of all of this, how do we begin to approach, how do we begin to reorganize language to allow these ideas a warmer home?
So I'm going to send you, after this conversation, my dialogue with Don Hoffman, who's a cognitive scientist and one of the best in the world. He has been nominated for extraordinary prizes, worked with Craig, etc., etc. And what we discussed is that science is a methodology. Mm-hmm. Science is a methodology. And it's not a window to quote unquote truth. It's a methodology which uses very good basic principles. Theory, experiment, validation, falsification, and you repeat it. Either the theory is right or it's not right. And there are experiments that will tell you whether the theory works or not. That's good science. Now, at the risk of being a little politically incorrect, which I've been all my life, I don't think of Richard Dawkins as a scientist. I think of him as an apostle of scientism, which is totally different, okay? Science is a methodology that gives us amazing technology, including the one we're using right now. Scientism is a belief system that says science is the way to truth. And so we have to redefine science. Science can not only be about what's being observed in empirical facts, but who or what is observing those empirical facts. In fact, I could convince you, empirical facts hide the truth. You know, what's his name? Heisenberg, the great pioneer of quantum physics, he says, and I'm now not basic, I'm paraphrasing him. He said, nature doesn't reveal herself to us as she is, but as exposed to our methods of questioning.
Right.
Wrong. Even he was wrong. Nature is not exposing herself. And we are not asking nature questions. We are asking ourselves questions without even knowing who the self is. Okay? We still ask questions. Where are experiments designed? In consciousness. Where are theories constructed? In consciousness. Where are observations made? In consciousness. What's an empirical fact? It's a response to a human question using a particular methodology and getting a particular evidence for that experiment using that methodology, cutting out every other hidden variable that gives you experience. So in fact, rational thought, empirical evidence hides the truth. It only exposes you to fragmented truth. And that's the reason we have climate change, global warming, extinction of species, war, terrorism, trade wars, eco-destruction, mechanized death, inflammation, and everything, including COVID-19. It's a distressed ecosystem that is crying out for healing.
I mean, that's powerful. And I would have to digest that to even know whether I agree with it or not.
Yeah, please. And hopefully you don't agree, so we can both question our habitual certainties.
But it raises an interesting question, because this work that you're talking about, this work of consciousness, it has real implications in the real world.
Yes.
And you just enumerated them.
Yes.
So does your work have a naturally political component to it? And if so, how do you activate that?
It does have a political component, but as soon as I introduce that, even that idea that it could have political implications, I get attacked by everyone. You know, leave politics out of this. And so I've learned the ancient wisdom, politics and religion, you don't touch. Mm-hmm. You just give the facts. give the theory, and let people decide.
It is really, it's fascinating work. It's work that I think we all inherently feel the need to do. We all have this yearning to reach for a better and deeper and more nuanced understanding of consciousness. It manifests itself in any number of ways, maybe through science, maybe through spirituality and religion.
Ultimately, by the way, it only manifests through direct experience.
Right.
Not through religion, not through science, direct experience.
And
when you do direct experience, you realize you never see a physical world. You only interpret your perceptions. That's it.
Is there a way to integrate what you're describing onto other methodologies? Can you introduce this onto science and enhance science?
You can introduce to any discipline. Just add one phrase. Everything you're doing, add one plus self-awareness. That's it. And self-awareness doesn't mean awareness only of the body or the mind. Self-awareness means observing and being intimate with your innermost being and recognizing that without that, there's no experience or interpretation of experience. That's all we need. To add some practices, don't even call them spiritual practices, practices for self-awareness, self-inquiry, self-awareness, awareness of the body, awareness of the mind, awareness of relationships, awareness of ecosystems, awareness of the universe, awareness of what humanitarians are saying, economists are saying, scientists are saying, even the apostles of scientific wisdom are saying. Listen to them.
Before I let you go, I end every episode of How to Be Amazing with something called the Amazing Five, where I will ask for a recommendation from you in each of 5 categories, things from your life that you would recommend to others. You mentioned Beethoven earlier. What music would you recommend? What do you love?
Vivaldi. It's exuberant.
Is there a specific piece?
I
mean, it's all kind of, yeah, it's all very, it's Vivaldi. It's all kind of upbeat and, and inspirational.
Just think Vivaldi.
Food.
Khichdi. You
What
know
is
what
that?
that is?
No.
It's a combination of lentils, vegetables, and rice. And there are 100 varieties in India, depending on the region that you go to. And it's a complete diet.
Just out of curiosity, are you a vegetarian?
Yes.
And did that emerge out of your work, or were you a vegetarian before this work?
No, it was a natural outcome of my work. I grew up as a meat-eating child in India.
And is it because you recognize the consciousness of other beings that you feel like it is therefore unethical to eat meat?
That now is definitely something in my awareness, but when I stopped eating meat, it was very gradual. I gave up heavy meat and then, slowly kind of decreased it and just felt better and just felt healthier and lighter. So that's how it started. But now, of course, I see the ethical ramifications, including climate change.
Yeah. Books, a book that you would recommend to others.
Freedom from the Known by J. Krishnamurti.
What's it about?
It's about the fact that the known is the prison, the unknown is the playground of creativity.
So that obviously complements your work really well.
Oh yeah, I've read Krishnamurti forever and I revere him as a great teacher.
A film or television?
A film on television.
A film or television that you love.
Lost Horizon.
Oh, what's Lost Horizon?
Lost Horizon was a book in the 30s, I believe, and then the film in the 40s in black and white. And it's about an American pilot who has a crash landing in Tibet and ends up in a place called Shangri-La, where no one ages. That's the first time Shangri-La was introduced to the West as an idea. The utopian world where people are young forever and live for eternity and don't age. That aging is a state of mind. The ending, I shouldn't tell you because the
No, don't tell
ending
me.
is amazing because it tells you it's not true. it actually was the trigger for everything I've done in my life, that everything you experience is a state of consciousness. Lost Horizon.
I'm not sure if this is
The author is James Hilton.
James Hilton. Lost Horizon. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question for this part of the conversation or not, but it strikes me as you talk about Lost Horizon that it is about the migration of the East to the West in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering how easy that integration was for you personally to come East to West. I know you were raised in or you went to school in a kind of Western school. And how much of the resistance to your work do you think would have been lessened, or if it would have been lessened, if you had come from the West saying these same things? Was there any kind of prejudice built into the resistance to your work?
Yeah, there was a lot of prejudice, but what people didn't know is that before I left academia, actually I thought just like them. You know, my whole training, my whole background, I went to medical school, which was subsidized by the Rockefellers, etc., etc. I took all exams in American medicine. In order to get to the US, I had to pass exams by the Educational Foundation of Foreign Medical Graduates. I had to do all the stuff that is done. And I loved it till I realized it didn't work. And so there was going back to a tradition and realized that, oh, wow, there's a science here too. That's when I met the resistance, and huge resistance. I just persisted after a while because I knew even though I couldn't convince the scientists, I could speak to the public. That's one thing, by the way, Trump has done very well. He doesn't care about anybody. He speaks directly to his demographic, even though they're all crazy. But I now directly speak to my demographic, and I don't think they're crazy. They're a little crazy, maybe. I hang out with sages, scientists, psychotics, and geniuses.
Do you? And this is one other related question. When I was watching your work and the panels that you've done, and when I was researching this topic, it seemed to me that I was only seeing men, both in the field of consciousness and also in the Eastern traditions, the gurus that I was seeing, all men. Is there some impediment for women in this field, both in the field of consciousness and in the field and in just Eastern spirituality?
It's this old story of patriarchy everywhere. So we have to be honest that patriarchal structures have ruled the world. And today we are seeing that everything that has ruled the world is under attack right now. Okay, because it's based on predation, conquest, colonial mentality. Sorry, but you're beneath your skin, you're African. Genetically, you're African. 99.99% of you is African. Okay, only the skin is different because of the weather. It's epigenetic modification. So, we now are questioning every construct we had in the past. And yes, you will see in my Metahuman new series on PBS, you will see there are women, and actually India is seeing great emergence of women gurus at the moment, Amma and so on, who are much more popular than the traditional gurus. And if you could, historically, you've always found them, by the way. And India has been matriarchal also, in its history. And there are many matriarchal societies. I personally feel it is time for us to resurrect the intelligence that exists in all of us that we refer to as the divine feminine. And the divine feminine is nurturing, is affectionate, is tender, is intuitive, and focuses on beauty and love in addition to being a good observer, which is what science is about.
Last recommendation. This is called potpourri. Anything from your life, like any kind of gadget or little doodad or just something that you love that you would recommend?
Soon to be released, Digital Deepak. AI, it's an AI representation of mine, which can tell you everything I've known, all my 90 books. And if I don't know the answer, it'll go to the Chopra Library and give you the answer.
Digital Deepak, when can we expect that?
Yeah, digitaldeepak.ai, and you can find it online, and it's going to be a beta release in a few months.
I'll check it out. Well, Deepak Chopra, it really is it's a fascinating topic. You're so well versed, obviously, in it. You've devoted your career to it. So it's nice to speak to somebody who really knows this stuff inside and out. The new book is called Metahuman, Unleashing Your Infinite Potential. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, Deepak.
Thank you. Take care.
This special episode of How to Be Amazing was made possible with support from The Dog Doc, a documentary about Dr. Marty Goldstein, the founding father of integrative medicine for pets. It is available on demand wherever you download your movies.